How would the two of you have handled scheduling and holding town hall meetings? Is it something that you would have even, knowing what you know now, you would even consider doing, or is that even a useful way to gauge public opinion and to communicate with your constituents these days?
I think we would have played tennis.
Smart answer.
No, in the sense, you just cannot make people happy with one of these meetings. I mean, in the first place, people are very misinformed about it, and it's tough to do the right thing. If those things were up first, I would ask John, because he was the expert on healthcare.
Yeah, right.
and Russell Long before him.
We had a meeting one time that Raymond went to, and it was some shrimpers. Was it shrimpers or crawfish farmers? The meeting got so bad. This was a long time. You think these meetings just started getting bad recently? Back in probably the 80s, I guess. I didn't go to the meeting. I sent Raymond and Chris down to the meeting somewhere down in Henderson or somewhere. And was it crawfish farmers or what? Shrimpers? Shrimpers at Lake Arthur. They got so mad they wanted to hang Raymond. So Raymond runs around the back and ran out the back and dove out the back window to get away from them.
That was the same group I met with.
But I mean, it's not to say that this is a new phenomenon, because you've had people who get intensely interested in an issue and they feel like the government's not doing everything bad to them or not doing enough for them, and they get really excited because their lives are at stake there, and nothing more personal than health care. So when you start talking about changing it, then you get all of these misinformation out there that's being like throwing gas on an open fire, and that's what blows up at these town hall meetings. And how do you handle it? I think that, I've always said that, look, I always wanted to go to a football game with walking in the stadium with the Queen of Homecoming or something, because they wouldn't boo you because the Queen of Homecoming was with you. So you want to take somebody with you that they like, and so they won't boo you too much. But I think that one thing I saw that I thought worked well was the attempt to try and have the questions presented beforehand to prevent the shouting matches. So I'm going to answer everybody's question. We're going to do it for 3 hours or 2 hours, but I want the questions presented so we can make sure we cover everybody. And then pick those questions and respond to them and try to prevent just the worst person in the audience from going crazy and shouting at you. I've seen some of those meetings, Jim, that work pretty good like that to try and control it.
Bob, you may have been with us when we were going to Shreveport to have a meeting in City Hall, and there was this bus. We passed this bus, and it had a neon sign on the back where the letters would come across, and it said, "Rush is right." Talking about Rush Limbaugh. These were what you call ditto heads. I'd never heard of ditto heads before. So we go up in City Hall, and I welcome everybody, and I was going to tell them all the great things that I'm doing for the state. Well, the ditto heads did not want me to speak, and they started yelling, and I literally could not say anything. I mean, they were there to disrupt the meeting. And they did, and the first time I'd ever heard of anything like this, and finally we just, shut the meeting down, and I was ready to call for the police to escort me out so I'd get safely out of the door.
I think that's one thing that has changed, Bob, and Bennett has been through some of the great challenges in political history in the state, having to run against David Duke, who ran against Russell Long. He never ran against, I never ran against him, he against me. But that was a kind of intense feeling for a guy who was literally, a Nazi practically, and if not truly. And yet, he'd go to these rallies and cite these crowds, which was just crazy. But Bennett survived that, and it wasn't easy.
The that sentiment that you were just describing that you met in Shreveport was taken onto the House floor earlier this year when Joe Wilson shouted at the president, "You lie." Could either of you imagine that ever happening when you were there? And if it did, what would have been the consequences for someone who did something like that officially? And how would his or her colleagues have treated that person who did something that outrageous?
Well, the Senate, when I got there, was a very different body from the way it is now. I mean, it was very relatively nonpartisan. There was no such thing as the wedge amendment. A wedge amendment is a cleverly worded amendment not meant to pass into law, but rather to create the substance for a 30-second spot. You know, like they want to take so much money from this and give it to crippled children. So that even though it might be the wrong thing to do to take money from LSU to give to crippled children, you would have to, you didn't want to be seen as voting against crippled children or some other worthwhile cause. That didn't come in really till Jesse Helms came into the Senate, and he created the wedge amendments. Then the Democrats learned to do it as well. So now you have about half the things you vote on in the United States Senate are wedge amendments. But it was much more civil. Still, even today, you wouldn't find that kind of you lie in the Senate. But it is not as friendly and as warm and cordial as it used to be.